you, Mr. Stringer, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today. I beg to move that this House has considered e-petitions 552201 and 329985 relating to support for UK hospitality industry and the creation of a Minister for Hospitality. And before I begin my comments proper, Mr. Stringer, I just want to say a couple of words about participation in this debate, because on Friday the Mayor of London declared a major incident in the capital, and it's abundantly clear that the rates of COVID-19 here are incredibly worrying. And in my view, it goes to underline why we must urgently move to allow virtual or hybrid proceedings here in Westminster Hall debate. And I know many colleagues from across the House share petitioners' concerns about the future of bars, restaurants, hotels, nightclubs and other hospitality businesses, but they are unable to be with us here today. And so I can reassure honourable colleagues and petitioners that in conjunction with cross-party colleagues, we will continue to press the government and House authorities to urgently allow and enable remote participation in these important debates. But the petition that we're debating today was started by Claire Bosey, editor of Chef and Restaurant magazine, and it has over 200,000 signatures, alongside a petition on general support for the hospitality industry, which was created by Chris McLaren and has around 45,000 signatures. I will.
Do I press this microphone or does it work itself? Thank you. I'm very grateful for an early intervention and can absolutely support her call for a hospitality minister. I was the Shadow Minister for Tourism when I first came into Parliament. I wanted that job to continue when we went into government, but the size of government does restrict the number of ministers that you can have. No doubt that's what we'll hear later. If in the event that we cannot be successful in getting a Minister for Hospitality, would she support an envoy for hospitality so we can at least have that voice for this important sector that's been battered so hard because of COVID-19, not least in my constituency of Bournemouth? Thank you.
Well, the honourable gentleman makes an important argument, and indeed it is over 200,000 petitioners that are calling for a Minister of Hospitality today, and I'm sure they'll be pleased that there are alternative suggestions if that isn't agreed to by the Minister today. Okay, I give way.
Thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. I'd mentioned to the Honourable Lady beforehand in relation to wedding venues, and particularly the Orange Tree in Grey Abbey in my constituency is one of those venues, employs 60-odd people, has a turnover for the whole local community, not just in bed and breakfast, but and many, many things. Whenever we had to call upon the Minister for someone Minister to look after the hospitality sector, could I ask the Honourable Lady, would she agree with me, that it's important that we have all of the regions of the United Kingdom, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales as part of that strategy and that plan, so we can work it together and we can help each other together, all together in the same way. Thank you.
I absolutely agree and endorse what the honourable gentleman has said, and that adds weight to the argument for that voice right in the heart of government, so that they can represent not only the interests of all aspects of hospitality, but all areas of the UK as well. I just wanted to put on record that my husband works in hospitality, so the daily ups and downs, and not to mention the huge challenges of COVID-19, are something that I live with on a daily basis and not just pursue as an interest and a concern here in Parliament. But the petition speaks to a concern that many of us will have heard time and time again from local businesses in our constituencies, that government lacks deep understanding of the nature of the hospitality industry and its diversity. The petitioners argue that is why we need a Minister for Hospitality to be that voice for the sector at the heart of government. The hospitality industry is the third largest UK employer, responsible for around 300 million jobs, generating £130 billion in activity and resulting in £38 billion of government revenue through taxation. And in terms of levelling up, it is one of the few industries to reach every part of the country, and it will be crucial to our recovery from the present crisis. Yet, unlike the arts or sport, it does not have a dedicated minister. I give way.
I thank her very much, and I would support her call for a stronger voice in government hospitality. But I don't know whether the Honourable Lady is a coffee drinker, but I'm sure she's aware from her constituency, as I am from mine, of the clusters of caffeine seekers, both outside at kiosks and even worse, inside waiting for their takeaway. They're pretty common sights right now. Would she agree with me that while these sales are not breaking any rules, they're not exactly essential, and it might just be that we need to put our coffee culture on hold for the time being?
Well, it's an interesting point that he makes, and perhaps the Minister may wish to comment on it in his response. But I believe this is a very timely debate, because while many businesses have taken a significant hit since March, hospitality, which thrives on social mixing and travel, has been crippled by repeated lockdowns and the risks posed by the virus. Local economies with higher proportions of workers employed in these sectors have been therefore hit disproportionately. And I know many restaurants have pivoted, going all out to provide cook-at-home and takeaway offers with contact-free delivery or curbside collections. In these strange times, Geordies can enjoy takeaways from all manner of venues across our city, from the Times Square Cafe on Station Road with its carry-out Sunday lunches to cook-at-home offerings from Cafe 21 and the Michelin-starred House of Tides on the Newcastle quayside. Nonetheless, the situation remains incredibly challenging for all. A recent UK hospitality study found that 41% of sector businesses thought they would fail by mid-2021. 1 in 5 thought they would have enough cash flow to survive beyond February. Even when restrictions were relaxed over the summer, most people could still only go to restaurants or pubs with the people they lived with or bubbled with. And the simultaneous closures of sports stadiums, cinemas, music venues and theatres all has a knock-on impact. When you've lost the business of people catching up with family and friends over drinks, people going on dates, and those who want to have a bite to eat after a match or a film, that's a huge chunk of revenue. And we know that hospitality also lost out badly from the drop in tourist spend this winter. Other parts of the hospitality sector, such as nightclubs, have remained closed since the first lockdown in March. And I know from the reaction to our recent debate on the nighttime economy that Newcastle's iconic nightlife is sorely missed by visitors and locals alike. And when I met with the petition creator, Claire Bosey, and some of its leading supporters on Friday, founder and CEO of Homegrown Hotels, Robert Hudson, chefs Tom Kerridge and Angela Hartnett, I heard really powerful examples that demonstrate that lack of deep understanding of the sector on the government's part. To be clear, there is enormous gratitude for the considerable support that the government has put in through the billions spent on measures like the Job Retention Scheme, the Business Rates Holiday and the various grants, including those announced by the Chancellor last week. But it's clear that the government would do a lot better if it stopped seeing the sector as something that's amenable to a one-size-fits-all approach. Ministers' main lever for controlling the virus over the last 9 months has been to switch the entire sector on and off at a moment's notice with little consideration given its complexity and its diversity. And when restrictions were eased over the summer, we saw the reopening of large chain pubs with customers often bunched together on outside tables, at the same time as small restaurants and bed and breakfasts where social distancing is easier to maintain. The curfew policy suffered from the same one-size-fits-all mindset. It was evidently drawn up with bars in mind, but unlike restaurants, they don't have to turn over tables. The curfew might have been appropriate for a city centre bar, though there were many issues with large groups of customers all leaving at the same time. But it just didn't make sense for small restaurants or rural hotels that may have been unable to safely spread out the accommodation of all of their guests for dinner as a consequence. August's Eat Out to Help Out scheme, although clearly very popular at the time, was seemingly designed with little regard to who it would help and the incentives that it would create. Rather than supporting those that were struggling the most, it potentially ended up being an untargeted giveaway to customers and businesses. It also made eating out much cheaper relative to takeaways, and in retrospect, helping restaurants by targeting subsidies at takeaways might have been more effective at boosting sales and also maintaining that social distancing that is so required. And I understand there are reasons why the government have made lockdown announcements very shortly before their introduction, but it has caused some real issues for the sector. I was told of a chef in London who had 2 tons of oysters delivered just 2 hours after London entered Tier 3, with no customers to serve them to. We heard reports yesterday of chickens potentially being culled due to a fall in bulk egg orders. And when hotels were closed by national lockdowns or by entering Tiers 3 and 4, hoteliers were left guessing whether they were even allowed to serve their guests breakfast in the morning. I know these aren't decisions that any minister takes lightly, but if it genuinely isn't possible to give more notice of these changes, what more can the government do to support businesses that are caught off guard? The repeated shutdowns of the hospitality sector has also meant that the businesses that supply them have been forced into hibernation for much of the past year. There's a whole other set of issues here that the current support measures, which are largely designed around jobs and rent, not businesses holding large amounts of stock, often perishable, just do not reach. Little financial support has been available throughout the pandemic, and with severe restrictions in place across the country since autumn, demand for their stock has seriously diminished. I also worry about the impact of this on-off cycle on the mental health of staff that work in the sector. They've had to suddenly return to very public-facing roles, turning on the charm, smiling at customers when they don't know if they will be able to hold on to their jobs for much longer. It's been great to see the widespread recognition of the strains of lockdown that it's put on the nation's mental health, but I think we need to pay particular attention to those sectors that have been most affected. Chair, thanks to the ingenuity and dedication of scientists in the UK and across the world, there is now a clear way out of this crisis, and we know this economic disruption won't be permanent. We will no doubt expect hospitality to play a significant part in the hopeful bounce back of the economic activity and employment, particularly among young people, and there's good reason to believe that for at least the businesses that do manage to survive. The pandemic has concentrated a tremendous amount of economic pain on workers in certain sectors, predominantly among insecure workers, and they deserve our utmost support. But there's also been a build-up of savings amongst those more fortunate to have been able to maintain a steady income. Many have saved the money that they used to spend on bars and hotels and restaurants rather than splurging it on more parcels from Amazon. And there are limits to how much of this will ultimately be spent on hospitality in due course. In all likelihood, people are likely to go out to the pub 2 or 3 times a week eventually, but that won't happen too soon. And there will be a catch-up on spending in that social consumption, we very much hope, when things return to normal eventually. And as the nation is vaccinated and the economy reopens, the rules we apply in hospitality inevitably become more nuanced and complex. It's important that we have that input from the hospitality sector as to how we can design that policy to not repeat the mistakes that were made in the summer of 2020 when they reopened. We need to get ahead of the problems, and petitioners have argued that to have that representation split between 2 crowded government departments, the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy and the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, it's not working. One of the leading supporters of the petition, Robert Hudson, put it succinctly when he said, "I've long held the view that the hospitality sector requires really focused representation in government. This is about the future of our industry, and the campaign and petition showcases the strength of feeling across the country on this issue. The hospitality sector deserves a seat at the top table." And that responsibility does sit across 2 departments, and that is not a problem. Hospitality sector businesses are businesses, but they are also a creative art. And in fact, much of the art sector rely on hospitality as a source of its revenue to underpin its activities. We used to have more ministers with cross-departmental briefs out of a recognition that some issues unavoidably straddle government departments, but that does seem to be out of fashion at the moment. And I worry it creates an incentive for passing the buck between departments, which reinforces the case for a Minister of Hospitality. It's hard to believe some of the more farcical debates that we've seen, such as a controversy about whether a Scotch egg constitutes a meal or not. If we had a dedicated hospitality minister, whether we would have ended up with that mess. And if a new minister is not something the government is open to, we must at least recognise that the sector needs a strong voice in government with a genuine recognition of its diversity and greater engagement with businesses and a much deeper understanding of the different ways that they are affected by lockdown measures. Chair, this is an industry that has always been driven by passion and soul. It's not an industry where businesses generally have huge amounts of cash reserves. We know many businesses operate at just above break-even point. The industry knows it needs to encourage more homegrown talent. Now it can't rely on people coming over from Europe. There's a levelling up piece here. As I've mentioned, hospitality is one of the few industries that's represented in almost every part of the country. It's an industry that is a gateway for so many people who don't particularly enjoy the academic side of school, but they have creativity and graft and can make a real success if just given the chance. And if the government understood and took the industry seriously, it could be a route to transformation in every community right across the country. So we need to raise the profile of hospitality and attract young people from the UK to do apprenticeships and see entering the hospitality industry as a sky's the limit career. And as we set out our stall on the world stage in the post-Brexit era, one of the key things that will attract people to our country with their investment is our culture and its offerings. And a big part of that will be the richness and quality of our hospitality. Newcastle's own hospitality sector has something for everyone. Restaurants offering everything from hearty traditional Geordie pub grub to innovative fine dining, hipster-style hangouts for craft beer and gourmet burgers, and a thriving street food scene. Our nightlife is famous in its own right and is regularly featured in guides and magazines, and it's often one of the top places for an unforgettable night out. But my fear in the current situation is that the larger, more standardised chains will have the resources to survive into the post-pandemic era, but it's those smaller heart and soul operations that may not, and we'll see a hollowing out of the sector. And I don't want to see my city lose any part of what makes it unique. I'm sure colleagues feel the same way about their own areas. But I also know that there is a limit to how much heart and soul you can give when you've been hammered month after month and you need to look ahead. And even at the best case scenario, there are several months of closure ahead. Countless smaller owner-operators are now worse off than they were when the pandemic began. Some took out personally secured loans in March, and having spent the last 9 months in difficulty, they're now not only looking at losing their businesses, but also their homes. And it's a real tragedy, as before this unseen crisis came along, they were good and viable businesses. So what does the sector need? The one-off grants announced by the Chancellor last week will of course be strongly welcomed and should help more businesses stay afloat. And the resource the government has put in through the job retention scheme has been a lifeline to sector employees. But industry representatives have been clear that existing support isn't enough to cover the costs of many businesses and won't secure their long-term viability. So we need a longer-term plan to help businesses plan their survival while the vaccine's rolled out, starting with clarity on how long the new support payments will be available. And I know UK Hospitality and others have called for the extension of the business rates holiday and 5% VAT rate to provide certainty in the longer term. And I would be grateful if the Minister could comment on whether this is under consideration. And I would urge the government to commit to urgently examining the inadequacies of its support measures as they relate to hospitality suppliers. And as I said in our previous debate on the nighttime economy, look at flexibility in the local restriction support grant to give local authorities that freedom to grant and target support towards the businesses that need it and can use it best. Chair, petitioners don't expect to go back to dining out, dancing in nightclubs and checking into hotels straight away. The public health situation is at a critical point and saving lives has to take precedence. But they do want a greater understanding of the diverse nature of their sector and a strong voice for them in government. Above all, like us, they want this country's mix of pubs, hotels, restaurants and clubs that do so much to enrich our lives to still be standing when this crisis is over.
The question